Go away from keyboard. Arguably the most important console command in all of Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead 2 has some of the most invigorating, engaging, and nerve-wracking moments in all of speedrunning. Bunny hopping at the speed of light away from endless hordes of rabid YouTube commenters, single-handedly dealing with special infected designed for 4-player cooperative play, and navigating endless randomized elements that plague the run from head to toe. If there's one word you could use to describe the speedrun, I think taxing would be the most fitting. The sheer amount of elements that need to be predicted and adapted to, the precise timing of bunny hops and boosts, all add up to an extremely execution-heavy speedrun. However, of all the discoveries made throughout the years in the optimization of this fabled franchise, arguably the most important one requires the player to expend the least amount of effort possible. The most revolutionary technique in the history of Left 4 Dead speedruns just so happens to be leaving the game. In order to properly illustrate just how this mechanic completely revolutionized the speedrun for Left 4 Dead, I need to give you some context of how runs were done without the use of such a command. Solo speedruns of Left 4 Dead 2 have the player racing to the end of one or multiple campaigns with the help of 3 AI companions. The go away from keyboard command allows the player to go idle. This is a state where the player is taken control of by a bot. In solo, there are already 3 bots, and the game won't allow 4 players to be bots at the same time. Because of this, you cannot go idle in solo, and thus, these companions mostly slow the player down. This is because the player has the ability to do a technique that is called bunny hopping. I've explained this in more detail in my Dark Carnival video, but the basic gist is the game caps the player's speed when holding W. But if you can get up to speed, then jump, you won't lose any speed even if you let go of W. Then the player can perform what is called a strafe. This is where they hold A or D and move their mouse in the same direction that they're holding. This pushes the character through the air in a way that builds up speed. This speed can be maintained without losing any acceleration from the friction of the ground if the player perfectly times the jump input the tick they hit the ground. This basically means the player will be in contact with the ground for such a small amount of time that the game can't actually apply any slowdown to the character. Reproducing this many times in a row can build large amounts of speed, thrusting the player towards the end of the level at high velocity. The bots, unfortunately, are not programmed to do this, so the player will end up at the safe room literal minutes before the bots will even get close. The bots are programmed to follow the player and walk to the end of the level. Even if you get inside the safe room and close the door, if the bots aren't with you, then the level won't end. There is a solution to this, however. In solo, the player usually, but not always, votes to expert and kills the bots, and then votes back to easy and completes the level. This isn't always ideal, however. A good example of this is the speedrun for the level, The Sacrifice. In The Sacrifice, there's a tank on the first map behind this door that you have to kill in order to progress. If you have good bunny hops, you can get to the tank in about 50 seconds, but the bots have a hard time getting there in under a minute and a half. Again, if the bots aren't with you, you can't open the door to fight the tank. You could just vote to expert and kill the bots, then get to the tank. However, The Sacrifice is fastest on versions of the game where you can only vote to change difficulty once per map. So by voting to expert to kill the bots, you would then have to fight the tank on expert. If you start the campaign on expert, you can kill the bots and then vote to easy. However, the tank will then have expert health, and you won't have bots to help you kill it. The solution is to get the bots to warp. When the bots are pathing towards the player, one of 3 things can happen. They find a clear path and follow the player correctly. They try to find a path to the player but get stuck, or they can't find a path to the player at all. When either of the latter 2 happen, when the player is not looking at the bots, they will then warp to the player. The way AI pathing works in this game is that all surfaces that can be walked on have to have a nav mesh applied to them. This nav meshing is what tells the AI where to walk and how to walk on it. If a location on the map does not have nav meshing, or that nav meshing points to the AI into a place that has some sort of interruption, like a wall in the way or something, then the AI will just stand still. This is how God spots work. The player stands in a location that has no or faulty nav meshing, thusly the AI cannot path to them because of it. In the case of God spots, this causes common infected to stand around until they eventually despawn. The despawning counts as a kill, which progresses the finale towards the end. For bots, however, if the player is standing on a location without nav meshing or with a broken nav mesh, this causes the bots to warp to them. So by standing in certain locations on this boat, the player can break the bot's pathing and get them to warp to the tank instead of just normally running. This is rarely used in solo speedruns, but it does have a few practical applications. The sacrifice, obviously, but an even more useful one is on the finale of Swamp Fever. In order to get to a location that has a broken nav mesh to speed up the finale, the player will down but not kill the bots in the safe room, then proceed to the finale alone. Once started, the player will get themselves stuck, and no, Step Bro can't help you. Similar to bots, players can also warp, but it's much more stringent on when and why. The only way a player can warp in single player is if they are stuck. Being stuck is pretty simple. In any location where you're physically incapable of moving, a 10-second timer starts. By uncrouching into this railing, the player gets their head stuck in it, and after about 10 seconds, it'll teleport them to the nearest player or bot. Because the bots are downed in the safe room, it teleports them there, and then the whole outside of the finale has this nav meshing turned off, acting as one giant god spot. If the bot dies first, however, then you don't warp, and you just die after 10 seconds. That's the basic of solo speedruns. But what would happen if you got a group of 4 people to run the game together, cooperatively? This would open up a whole new world of possibilities, and all it required was having 3 friends. Needless to say, I haven't ran very much co-op. But I have been learning it recently as me and a few others have gotten the run into the next games done quick. Our run's going to be at midnight Pacific Standard Time on July 1st. Make sure to be there. Co-op speedruns provide a unique challenge compared to solo speedruns. In solo, one player has to do everything all by themselves. The single male grind set is lonely, however, and because of this, the run can be extremely volatile, ending at any moment. In co-op, however, each player has a dedicated role. One person will run as the lead. The lead's job is to have as good buddy hops as possible and take care not to get grabbed by specials. It's the most similar to solo runs. Second is the booster. The booster has a job completely unique to co-op speedruns. It turns out, if you shoot a player in the ass with a grenade launcher as they're jumping, it yeets them at Mach 10 into outer space. This speed can be kept and transitioned into bunny hops, essentially supercharging this zoomer with NOS energy. The goal is to get into position quickly and accurately time the grenade launcher to boost the lead player. The timing is kind of tight, and often they have to compensate for high ping. The next players are the second lead and the collector. There are circumstances where the lead player can't make it all the way to the end of the level by themselves, or it would be faster to send multiple players ahead. In these instances, the third player is known as the second lead. Confusing, I know. They will sometimes get boosted, but a lot of their job is to protect the booster and lead while they set up for tricks, and then go ahead in key instances. The fourth player is almost useless, and hey, that's me. My basic goal is to scavenge the map to collect anything that we may need. Grenade launchers, boomer biles, defibrillators, the works. On top of that, I have another very important job though, setting up the warps. Okay, enough blue balling, it's been set up now. What the hell does go away from keyboard do exactly? Well, like I said before, it lets a bot take control of the player. This is a feature that was implemented so if players leave the game, the remaining players could still have 4 companions to play the game with. It's automatically triggered if a player doesn't produce any inputs for 10 seconds straight. The bot will take over and you will have to take control manually to get back into the game. It can also be activated by tabbing out or binding the command go away from keyboard to a key. Binding this command to a key turned out to be the most important part of all cooperative speedruns for one simple reason. It allows you to warp as a player basically whenever you want. We already established how bot AI works when it comes to pathing and warping. And when you use the command go away from keyboard, the bot that controls the player has the exact same rules. This means that you can warp to other players without having to be stuck, as long as you or the player you're trying to warp to can get to a spot with a broken or missing nav mesh. But it's even better than that. Because of the way that having multiple players in the server works, you can use a second or third player to hold the bots in place, perform what is called an omni warp. For greater context, let's use an example. The most iconic of all co-op maps has to be the first on Swamp Fever. This is because it shows off most of the cool tech in a very easy to understand way. Firstly, the 4 players run towards the river where there is a ferry that they have to activate to cross the gap and get to the safe room. There is a few possible spawns for a grenade launcher here. It's very important to find one on this map. The lead runs ahead and checks for the furthest one into the map while on his way to the ferry. The booster, second lead, and collector all look for a defibrillator, boomer bile, molotov, and especially the grenade launcher. In this example, the booster finds the grenade launcher and picks it up. This is when they call to the lead that they have it, so that he can go ahead without looking for the grenade launcher at his spot. The booster's second lead and collector all group up and perform an omni warp. The bots will always path to the closest human player. If 3 players group up and 2 of them go idle, the bots will stand still because there's a player nearby. After 6 seconds of standing still, the bots are prepped. This means that if the 3rd player goes idle, then all of a sudden, the nearest human player is a great distance away, and the bots will already be standing still for over 6 seconds. This triggers them to teleport to the lead player instantly, without having the need to be stuck or on a broken nav mesh. Omni warps are very powerful. They essentially allow you to teleport up to 2 players across the map without needing to find a broken nav or a stuck spot. Because all of the human players are now far away, the collector starts to path to the group. The path is uninterrupted though, so the player just starts to run towards them. At this point, all players take control once more and set up to boost across the water. There is a large invisible wall on the other side of the river that only despawns if you activate the ferry. This also calls the horde, so the second lead protects the booster and the lead while they attempt to launch the gap. Once across, the lead tries to maintain bunny hops to get as close to the safe room as possible while the others prep an omni to warp him. The booster needs to keep the grenade launcher for other tricks on later maps of this campaign, and the second lead hopefully has collected items we need for future tricks as well. They both go idle to prep a warp, and the lead calls it. Then the collector warps them by going idle. This leaves 3 players right outside the safe room and the collector near the start of the map. Once the collector jumps into the water and dies, the level ends in about 1 minute and 11 seconds. Without the command, go away from keyboard, the other players wouldn't be able to quickly get to the boost spot and wouldn't be able to save the required tools for future maps. But this is only the beginning of what this command can do for the team. The primary job of the collector is to time warps off the call of the lead, but the lead can also make great use of going idle. Going idle at the right times can completely break the game. If the lead idles, all of the common infected pathing towards them will lose their aggression. This is because common infected are programmed to always give their attention to human players. So by flashing idle, the lead player can make it a much easier time running ahead. They can also use it to gain speed. Normally when you get hit by a tank, the player can't strafe or jump. But if you idle right after being hit, when you take control, you regain complete control, allowing you to maintain bunny hops off of the hit from a tank. On top of that, if the lead gets grabbed by a charger, you can flash idle on the right timing to make the charger do 0 damage. This is useful to buy time so the other players can catch up and save the lead. Boosters also can benefit from idle. Oftentimes players need to die quickly, so the lead can end a level. If the grenade launcher is fired, then the player who fired it goes idle before the grenade explodes. The grenade switches teams. On fire, the grenade is on the human team, but when idled, it switches to an environmental team. This makes it do an insane amount of damage to players, instantly killing them. This is only sometimes a good thing. If the level ends and a player is idle on load to the next level, they will have control, but then it'll be automatically forced into idle after a few seconds. This sometimes leads to shooting the grenade launcher, then being auto-idle, killing everyone.
I don't know.
Oh my god! Are you kidding?
In order to show the true potential of these tricks, I'm going to break down 3 maps: the coaster on Dark Carnival, and the 2nd and 3rd levels of Hard Rain. Upon load in on the coaster, the lead takes off and just books it to the end of the level. The other 3 players follow suit in the Tunnel of Love, making their way to this corner behind these swans. The collector makes sure to grab a sniper rifle and preps the other 2 who go idle. Once the lead gets to the coaster, they head into this corner and call for a warp. When the players warp, they warp directly behind the player they're warping to. By backing up into this wall, when the players warp to the lead, they'll end up on top of the invisible wall way up in the air. First the booster, then the second lead. Because the location behind the swans has no nav meshing, the collector can also warp the booster and the second lead, set up for a boost over the entire roller coaster. The problem is, well, it's really high in the air, so there's no way to land without dying instantly. That is, unless you perform what is called an edge bug. In other Source games, especially Half-Life, an edge bug is where you come into contact with the corner or edge of some geometry for such a small amount of time that it is only half registered. Not registered for long enough to apply fall damage, but for just long enough to reset falling velocity. So by landing exactly right, you can negate all fall damage. This, however, is not the case in Left 4 Dead 2. In Left 4 Dead 2, the game keeps track of whether you are in the air or on the ground by using 2 bit flags. Simple 1 or 0 expressions, 0 for in the air, 1 for on the ground for the first one, and the other one, 1 for in the air and 0 for on the ground. The exact opposite. When idling, the game sets the default value of the first bit flag to 1, aka being on the ground. This conflicts with the other bit flag that also has the value of 1 for being in the air. Thus, the game gets confused and does not apply stored fall damage. This only gets rid of half the problem when falling though. You get rid of the previously stored damage from fall height by going idle, but you're still falling at a very fast rate. And even if you only fall 1 foot, if you're falling at a high enough velocity, you will instantly die. For example, being spitter boosted into the ground. What? If you then edge bug, you will reset your falling velocity to 0. This combined with going idle cancels all fall damage. The second lead goes idle after being boosted and edge bugs off this bush, landing safely right next to the safe room. The booster then jumps to his death while the collector uses the sniper rifle to kill the lead and then jumps to his own death, ending the level in roughly 1 minute and 20 seconds. Now we jump into the final maps of this video to show what crazy strategies can be created when applying everything that we have learned and adding a little bit of new tech on top. Hard Rain 2 and 3 are the same map, just performed forward and then backwards again with slight changes. But the physical locations of the safe rooms are exactly the same. In the previous map, our runners have collected a defibrillator and a grenade launcher. All 4 players head outside and the booster boosts the lead about a quarter of the way through the level. Then, the collector preps an Omni Warp to send the second lead and booster to the lead on his call. Once warped, the booster then boosts the lead once again to the final third of the level. Right after, the booster boosts the second lead into this spot, which has no nav meshing and idles. The collector, who then went back to the safe room, idles and on the call of the second lead, idles, sending the booster to the lead with an Omni Warp. They then boost one last time and the lead idles to perform a slope bug, a trip similar to an edge bug, negating fall damage. He then runs to the safe room and the booster jumps to his death, while the lead is idle and the second lead also goes idle. Since the second lead is on a faulty nav mesh, he will not path and warps to the nearest player, which is the collector in the safe room. The collector backs into the corner and aims at the stairs, so the second lead will warp into the wall. Once in the wall, the team votes to expert and kills the collector. Since the second lead is in the wall, there's a 10-second timer running. Once those 10 seconds are over, he'll warp to the lead, who is now in the ending safe room with the door closed. Defibrillating a teammate takes about 3 seconds, so the second lead times the defib to be active while the warp happens. When in the safe room during a level end, all actions currently started are automatically finished. This is used in solo to heal for no real time loss, by starting to heal after closing the door. The same applies here but with the defibrillator. The defib finishes reviving the collector in the starting safe room after the level ends. Because map 2 and map 3 of Hard Rain are on the same map backwards, that means the collector is already at the end of map 3 at the very beginning of the level. On load in for the next map, the lead then kills the other 2 players and gets in this corner that has a broken nav mesh, idling to teleport to the collector, who's set up ready for map 4. After 6 seconds, the lead teleports instantly ending map 3. In total, map 2 is about 1 minute and 30 seconds, and map 3 is about 10 seconds long. This shows just the start of what is possible with Go Away from Keyboard. New things are found every day with this amazing technique. Who would have thought that such an insanely execution-heavy game's most powerful tool would just be going away from your keyboard? Speaking of going away from keyboard, I have not been uploading very much lately, and I'm sorry. But I have been trying to get my highlight channel and archive channel up and running with some more awesome content for you guys. If you would please go give them a sub and check out some of the awesome content I've been making on there in the meantime, I'd really appreciate it. Also, another announcement, I'll be running 3 games at Summer Games Done Quick 2022. I'm super excited and I hope you guys can make it. Stay stylish.